Welcome to Epic Mom Life. I am your host, Kara Peterson. This show is sponsored by The Possum's Tale, a unique book adventure for your 6 to 12-year-old child. Let's jump into today's show. Homeschooling is the future of education. So why does a public educator say now is the time to homeschool? Our educational system is, in my opinion, failing miserably. I am a public educator who believes that now, while this foundational institution finds firm legs again, and I do think that it will, but right now, parents should look into homeschooling as a very viable option. These are the reasons why I feel that the public educational system is failing our future generations. Extreme ideas taught in school, schools serving as social service providers, outdated curricula, failing to look at what children need, administrivia and test, I can't even say that word, I keep messing it up, but not prioritizing academic excellence, and failure to reevaluate during COVID. Extreme ideas taught in school. Schools are where we should be teaching our children a foundation of basic skills. Yes, that is absolutely true. Hopefully, we teach them how to learn, strategize, problem solve, and think critically so that they can face whatever the world becomes when they grow into it. We can no longer teach a generation to be ready for the world they will enter because we don't know what that world will look like when they leave, say, our sixth grade classroom and then go into the world 6-7 years later. So we have to give them the skills so that they can learn or become whatever it is that they need. However, our schools seem to be encouraging our children to strongly feel the way the current trend thinks they should feel towards a social or political sway. The interesting thing about this is in politics and education both, it seems that we go through extreme swings regularly. To give you an example in education, we went from whole language to phonics. I mean, those are two incredibly different things, and that won't touch any buttons probably. But by bringing those extremes into a classroom to teach our children is irresponsible. It is also a colossal waste of time that we don't have in a teaching day. Extreme ideas. So here are just a few extreme ideas that I don't think we should be going for. Oregon no longer requires reading, writing, or mathematics knowledge to graduate. And I have links for all of this stuff. If you're wondering where I'm getting all this, just go to the links at the end. They do have requirements to take and pass certain classes, but they have also made 3 different kinds of certificates for graduation. They have a modified diploma, an extended diploma, and an alternative certificate. So it kind of makes you wonder as an employer when they say, yeah, I have a diploma, what exactly they really have. Critical race theory is being taught in our public schools. There's a huge, debate going on. Is it really being taught? What is it being taught? So I just looked it up. So while this is being taught, our math and reading scores are now at the lowest they have been in decades. Here's the figures for you. 62% of adults ages 18 through 20 encountered critical race education in public schools. Now, this is what's so important to notice. Of this 62%, only 82.4 went to public school. So already we're skewed for our statistics because only 82% of the people they polled actually went to a public school. Of those people, 62% of all of the people they polled did get a critical race theory education. Sex education. This is really interesting. Sex education is no longer when that sexy sperm comes a-calling to the bodacious egg and we have a baby and all the hows and how-nots to make sure that kids are not taken unaware by this action. No, sex education has now become that children are told that even if they physically manifest as one sex or the other, they aren't really that sex. And that to me will be covered under mental health issues. It's not like I'm against any of these things. I feel that schools should be separate from ideas that are not academic related. I also feel that teachers have a serious task of helping young minds grow their own way, not a certain way that everybody feels is the current trend. A child oftentimes loves and admires their teacher. They will reflect the teacher's viewpoints because of this admiration. It is therefore crucial that the teacher does not give away any personal feelings or thoughts on social, political, or religious beliefs. This actually seems like a laughable way of thinking in today's educational institutions. And this is my number one reason for why parents should take their children out of public schools and nurture critical thinking at home. Now, I want to make something perfectly clear because I believe in this so strongly. I believe it is now the parent's responsibility to do the job of not infecting a child with beliefs. I believe very strongly that the child needs to be taught how to think for themselves. Okay, number 2, schools as social service providers. There's a very, very fine line educating a population for what they need to know for the future and social services. And the reason why we have so many social services in these schools, honestly, is because you have a population that's captive. It's held captive there. So it's like, this is a great opportunity to get them the stuff and the knowledge they need. But examples of some of these really fabulous social services, but social services nonetheless, are DARE and GREAT programs. DARE, or Drug Abuse Resistance Program, is taught to children in elementary schools. It's a program that teachers need to make time for in their schedule, and an officer comes in and teaches the class. GREAT, or Gang Resistance Education and Training, is also taught to children in middle schools. I taught in the public schools like 20 to 25 years ago. So I don't know if these are still taught in the schools, but programs are still being taught that are like this, right? This was also taught by a police officer. Sex ed. Okay, sex ed is taught in the Prescott schools, and parents have argued on many sides to this education. One side being that it should be taught at home. Another side being that abstinence education is not realistic. True confessions, I'm totally on that side. But that's the kind of sex ed that we have in our Prescott schools. Mental health. So all of those are great programs to what I'm going to classify as mental health. This is where the entire transgender issue would come in my opinion. So here is what I know, and I don't know a lot about transgender, but here's what I know. The transgender population and their supporters are very loud right now. They are in our legislation, changing our laws, and in our schools. The reality, however, is for all of the noise, expense in new webinars, policies, awareness, seminars, etc., only 1.1% of U.S. citizens identified as transgender as of June 2024, and another 1.52% identified as non-binary. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, oh, well, some people didn't want to identify and da-da-da-da-da. Well, in 2024, it's the coolest thing ever to be transgender. Everybody should be doing it, right? So I don't hold that argument is as sound. I think that a lot of people would be more than happy to say, oh yeah, that's me. I am totally transgender. So I think that those numbers are very close. So let's just say that this population has 3%. So for all of the noise and all of the expense and all of the hoops that all of the businesses and schools and everybody are jumping through, it's 3% of the population. And I just want you to think about that. Okay, more mental health issues, depression, anxiety, cutting, anorexia nervosa, bulimia. No parent wants to face a child with these problems, and no child wants to try to navigate these because this is a really bleak landscape. All of these programs are incredibly important. We have programs for so much of this in the schools, and they are all prevalent in our society. I just tend to wonder if our public schools are the place where we should be teaching these social issues and how to deal with them. We have relied on parents in the past to teach our children about drugs and sex. And the schools ended up taking over because the numbers were up. Parents were not effective at educating their children in a way that discouraged substance abuse and teenage pregnancy. And there is more argument that if we do not discourage it effectively, then we end up spending more money in social programs for those people who have difficulties with that down the road. However, the schools are in a spot where they can't afford all that they're doing. The schools are pretty much going to be going bankrupt because they've spread themselves too thin. And what they're not doing well is actually teaching our kids. And that's the one job they were supposed to be doing. So I think it may be time for public schools to cut out as much as they can. And these are all services that the schools must offer that private and charter schools do not have to offer. These are one of the reasons that public schools always are making cuts, that they are paying for too much. That doesn't make any sense. I think it may be time for the public schools to cut out as much as they can. So I don't know if you realize, but private schools and charter schools don't have to offer everything that public schools do. And therefore, they can use the budget they're given, especially charter schools. They're publicly funded, but they don't have to offer anything that the public schools do in a lot of ways. So the public schools are constantly making cuts because they're providing too much, but they can't cut certain things. So they cannot cut busing. They cannot cut an education for the disabled or the gifted. They cannot cut specific occupational or physical therapies or counseling for students. They cannot cut reduced lunch or free lunch programs. They must accept all children within their regional boundaries, meaning they must put money aside for behavior classrooms. Charter schools and private schools can just not accept kids into their schools. They don't have to have lunches. They don't have to bus kids to get there. Public schools must offer free testing to parents for special education, gifted education, or dyslexia. There's probably a few other tests that I'm just not listing. Because public education is free, they cannot require students to buy school supplies. So they must have these supplies in case a student does not. Now, I know all parents are thinking, oh my gosh, I spend like $200 a year on school supplies. Technically, if your child goes to a public school, all you have to do is go to the office and say, I can't afford them, and they have to supply them. So I reached my proverbial limit clear back in 1998 when I saw too much energy, time, and resources being funneled into, albeit very worthy programs, but not academic school programs. I think a line should be drawn, and we should expect our parents to take responsibility for their children. They are their parents, after all. This will get a lot of critics. But the reality is, people have to step up. They had the babies. They should take care of the babies. We who think will not teach their children all of the social stuff that they need to learn. So this is reason number 2 for why I believe parents should take their children out of public education system and grow generations at home who think and strategize. All of this parents can do while discussing with their children the dangers of drugs. They can also look at their own family history and make a very personal story and appeal about mental health and how it is generationally in their story. They can also recognize their children's very unique needs and address them the way they need them addressed, especially if that child is one of the 3%. Okay, outdated or overtaught curricula. Overtaught curricula is one of my bones to pick. I looked all over the internet, and honestly, I can't give you any firm data, links, or research. I just know based on my being in the classroom. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. When I spoke to my 6th graders, many had already learned about World War II or the Civil War, and this is what was in my curricula for social studies. None had learned about the Korean or the Vietnam Wars. And these wars were not in my curriculum to teach either. My theory back in 1997 was that these two wars, specifically the World War II and Civil War, had messed, so they were taught multiple times rather than teach something new. So that's the over curricula. We do the same thing over and over again. We also spend at least 3 weeks at the beginning of the year, each and every year, reviewing the previous year's content. We as teachers need to know, we have to do this because we need to determine where our classes are so we know where we can begin teaching in earnest. The students need this because then, I don't know if you're aware, but the weeks before Christmas and the week before school gets out at the end of the year, unless you're in high school and you're having tests, these are completely wasted academically. I always crack up when kids are in elementary school and parents are talking to me and their teachers are so mad because they're taking them out. And I'm like, why? They're just going to sit and watch movies. It's like a wasted week. And there is usually some review, and this is just necessary, right? But it's usually just a day or two after Christmas break or spring break. A lot of this is unavoidable. I don't love it, but it is what it is. But what I am against is the public education as an institution, its seeming refusal to assess what they are teaching, what is needed, and to trim the fat and to add new cream. I have looked at whether or not teaching writing papers or art is beneficial, and I have links to those. I'm a writing teacher. I love to write. Writing is like my in my blood. And yet I looked at this to determine, is this something that we should still be teaching our children in the age of AI? You should totally be looking at least every 5 years with the way things are advancing. What are you teaching these kids in school? And is this going to help them learn how to strategize, how to think critically, how to problem solve, all those things? And is this a basic skill that they will actually need for further on? For example, in a day and age when literally everything is computer-based, I would think a communication course on how to ask Google and AI questions that result in the answers you are actually seeking would be a must. I can't tell you how many people say, oh, I don't ask Google because then it just comes up with all these things, or then there's ads. So we should have a class on how to do that. We as a society oftentimes do not like change. However, our children need to be effective, efficient, well-educated, and happy in the world they will face, not in the world we grew up in, a world that very arguably does not exist and will never exist. This is reason number 3 for why I believe parents should take their children out of public school. When parents homeschool their children, they can look at what their children are interested in and what the world is demanding of its citizens. Then the parent can help guide their child through an education that will better prepare that actual individual child. I'm so bad at this word. Not prioritizing academic excellence. You might not know this, but there was an actual time, and I want to say it was in the 80s, that we as a nation were really concerned with producing as well-educated students as China. It was either China or Japan, but I think it was China. I can't find the articles on it now, but it was before the internet. I have commented to others in education about this, and they totally remember this. It was a big stinking deal. We were comparing our students' hours in the day and year compared to those students. We were looking at, like, there was this amazing kindergarten in China, and it had like no doors, and the kids just kind of walked from room to room. I mean, we were comparing everything to make sure that our kids were going to grow up just as educated and just as smart, right? And then crickets. We just gave up. Our kids no longer deserved the attention we were giving to try to assure them the highest quality education we could. Through the years, we have continually had good and just laws come to us that have done nothing but water down our education. No child left behind. What this ended up doing was we as teachers could not move on to another concept in our classroom if a child did not understand the one we just learned. I'm a teacher. I love kids. However, the reality is that not all children are bright in the same way as each other. I taught reading and writing. There were some kids who were not going to get the structure of a paragraph and write it as well as they were going to do math computations. The public schools, the very way it is supposed to teach the masses, means it cannot individualize for the few. This is what so many homeschoolers argue. They're like, they're not meeting my child's individual needs. Public school, honestly, is not set up to do that. It is set up to be a free education to get the masses in a smart way. When you're teaching 30 kids, you can't individualize realistically in a good way. So for a teacher to have to stop a classroom's learning so that one child can be taught and retaught in different ways means that 97% of the other kids are bored. Well, when kids are bored, we have the parents calling because their children received behavioral notices. Do you see what's going on? Do you see a cycle? So now we had another law. We have it in Arizona for sure. I'm sure we have it in other states. SEI, or Structured English Immersion. In Arizona, all of our lessons had to incorporate SEI. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the SEI practices are really good because they actually address different learning styles. However, one of the rules to SEI is that you actually teach a concept 3 different ways. Again, you have I'm going to say 15%, which is actually pretty high. But this is designed for our children whose English is not their first language. So let's just say 15% did not get the concept the first or second time around. So now you're going to the third time around, right? So 85% of your kids are really bored. I would say of my 85% of the kids who got it on the first and the second time, over 55 got it the first time. So remember that discipline and upset parents and phone calls and the cycle? Yep, this one starts all over again. So this mass trend of parents who are like saying, my child's a behavior problem because they're bored. Sometimes, honestly, your child just doesn't sit still well and doesn't listen well. And the way public school is designed is we can't just be jumping around. We do have to be sitting for a certain amount of time. However, with these kind of laws, yeah, I'd be bored too. It's really hard to just sit there and listen to the same thing. Oh. So we are absolutely not prioritizing academic excellence. Instead, this means we are teaching less So if your child wants to be a college professor, an archaeologist, a marine biologist, an astronaut, fill in the blank with any career that requires higher education, we are no longer catering to the needs of your child in public schools. The public schools are now catering to the very few individuals who have difficulty learning a concept, or they are catering to the children who are way below grade level or who speak another language and should not even be in the regular class. They should be in an ESL classroom. And that's a whole nother argument, and we don't need to get into that. This is reason number 4 for why I believe parents should take their children out of public education and homeschool them. The public schools simply no longer care about every child doing their best. You as a child have to fight for your child's best education. And right now, that's you. And here's an interesting fact. The home educated typically score 15 to 25 percentile points above the public school educated students on standardized academic achievement tests. And COVID. I know everything comes back to COVID, but my final reason for bailing on education, public education, and recommending homeschooling is the reaction to COVID by schools. Now, first, I want to make sure to state very clearly. So the school shut down in March of 2020. Everything came to a screeching halt. The businesses shut down. Everything went, I think around the 18th of March for sure, around there. I'm not talking about the rest of the 2019-2020 year. So from that March to the end of May, early June, I'm not critiquing that at all. Nobody had a clue. Nobody knew which end was up. We were all taken by surprise. And so anything that the schools did, I commend them on doing anything. That what I am talking about and what made me pretty much disgusted, I'll be real honest with you, is the fact that the public schools encouraged computer use, even for kindergartners. So we have kindergartners here that are I think they're in half-day kindergarten, but I have a friend who has a kindergartner. They were on the computer for 3 hours. No child of kindergarten age, 5 years, should be on a computer screen for 3 hours. The schools had all summer to regroup. They were given funding. They were given a lot of funding, and they were encouraged to find a better way to teach. Do you know what all of them across the nation came up with? Spend money on computers so that each and every family can have a computer. That way all things are equal, and improve internet access. Yep. Let's get kids on screens even longer. That is the best idea they could come up with. Even though they are our education resource. They had been telling parents for years the dangers of children on screens. And even though they know many children cannot learn visually, this is actually the argument I have against parents homeschooling. Some parents don't realize that children have different ways of learning. So some parents go into homeschooling and they think, oh, this is going to be so easy. I'm just going to throw them on a program on the computer. And they don't realize that many children, if they're not doing well in school, it's because schools teach usually visually or through audio. And if your child doesn't learn that way, they're not going to be successful at homeschool when you just throw them on a computer. They also knew very well, the schools knew that parents were going to have a really hard time making this work because that was the learning style and parents were going to have to oversee that. So what makes me really sad is homeschool cooperatives, which I fully endorse and love, were still going strong. There were children that some were meeting. They were all meeting by Zoom. Many were still meeting in person with masks. They were learning. They didn't stop. Like even when the public schools stopped, or then they did a hybrid, or they did all this stuff, the homeschool cooperatives still met. All the parents just got together and they said, okay, what are we comfortable with our kids? And they were excelling. Schools had an example of a format, that worked. However, instead of looking at what public education deems as its competition, they came up with throwing children on screens for hours a day. Our schools had the opportunity, the time, and the money to become better, and they didn't. So I have done the big reveal. People ask me, why do you write homeschool articles and have products to support homeschoolers when you are a public educator? Well, I believe wholeheartedly in the concept of a public education. I just think that the entire institution has gone horribly off course. Instead of thinking of what is best for the children, it seems to be trying to marginalize the masses while celebrating the very few. So the movie quote for this week, there's a lot more to school than showing up on time. Matilda. If you are hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode. And for that, I want to send you a huge thank you. Please leave me a comment or review and share with other moms you know. Get in touch in the comments or on Kara's social media networks. See you next week for a new episode.